Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 20th of October. Yeah, and just what you just start, you get a phone call. I'll start again just so you can edit it easier, Andrew. Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 20th of October, and we are watching episode 26 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight to the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates. Joining me on this episode are major political parties too eager to suspend our freedoms is my guest Michael O'Neill. Michael is the owner and manager of Misty Mountains Lifestyle Retreat in Bellbrook, New South Wales. He is the founder and Senate candidate for the Informed Medical Options Party. Michael is resolute in his defence of the rights of all Australians to have control over their own bodies and for the democratic rights to safe health practices and choices. Having been involved in the natural health industry for 35 years, he has witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of lifestyle changes and the use of harmless natural remedies in disease prevention. Michael experienced the dangerous side of vaccination when he was first a child and vaccinated, and advocates for the comprehensive, unbiased investigation in the claims of thousands of families who maintain that their child has been severely or irreparably damaged by vaccines. He calls for an end of the media-inflamed hysteria over what used to be normal, non-lethal childhood diseases. Michael's keen interest in history allows him to draw parallels between the current vaccination hysteria and other 20th century despotic powers who sought to control people with the use of panoptic propaganda strategies that turned peaceful citizens against their own neighbours. He is adamant that in a free democratic society, citizens should be not subject to government compulsion, either by direct force or emotional coercion. Michael is contesting the Senate seat in New South Wales to fight for the democratic right of all Australians to assert control over their bodies. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for joining us. I know your time's valuable. If we could just start off in regards to your experiences from younger days and that, and to your progress through now, and to you actually felt the need to found the party.
Sure. I grew up in a fairly conventional lifestyle. We ate very conventionally as the Australian meal, which was meat and 3 veg. I was an electrician. I then became a truck driver. I trucked all over Australia. I became very interested in health when my sister had what they considered an incurable disease. I saw her get cured through natural treatments and being treated by a chiropractor at a health retreat. And so I felt that it was a very worthwhile endeavour, and I started my first health retreat in 1988. I then worked in various retreats all over Australia, Queensland, Victoria, and also overseas. I've worked as a consultant in the health retreat business. And my first child had a terrible reaction to a vaccine. That was no big life-changing moment. It was just something that I thought, we won't do that again. My wife was a nurse. We told anytime we go to the doctor or something had happened, they'd say, are you up to date with your vaccines? We said, no, we had a reaction once. We're not going to do that again. That was pretty much accepted. We weren't an outcast in society. We weren't thought to be any sort of extremists. We were just people that made a decision what we thought was in the best interest of our child. That was pretty easy. That was 37 years ago. Come down to 2015, introduction of no jab, no pay. Even though I have no children living under my care, I have grandchildren. I currently have 23 grandchildren. I decided that no jab, no pay was a bridge too far, that people were making decisions about their children's health but were getting no recognition for their involvement, their knowledge of health, their observation of what was happening. And they were told that if you don't participate in a program, then you will be penalised and lose benefits that belong to every Australian, whether that be childcare, whether it be Part B of your family payment. And there was no room for conscientious objection, religious exemption. And I found all this quite un-Australian. And I did inquire to the main parties. I went and spoke to many of them, particularly my local members. No one seemed slightly interested to oppose the legislation that was on the that was being put up. And I got with a group of friends that were concerned at that time. They were mostly businessmen, and we decided, let's start a party that would defend the rights and expose that what's happening, and that some families were being marginalised, particularly low-income families. They were being marginalised and penalised for just some basic health decisions they were making for their children. And we felt that the big pharma had overruled a parent's right to make basic medical choices. So that saw the inception of the Informed Medical Options Party, because that's what it's about. It's information in the medical arena, and we believe that people should have options. They have information and options. That's what we're asking. And we've made a political position of this, because we feel that there are, we literally know of tens of thousands, and now we know that it's possibly into the millions, particularly in the current state, that are unhappy about medical directives that are being put on them. And we wanted to be a voice for these people that are currently unrepresented in the political landscape.
Just on the vaccination, no funds, no jab, or no jab, no funding. Yeah. To what extent is that around now? So what okay. Penalties actually imply?
Okay, so if you don't vaccinate your child to the full vaccination schedule as outlined by the government, which can be up to 59 vaccines in the first 2 years. They don't get them all at once. They get them combined into groups of vaccines. If you're not fully up to date, even if you was to miss 1 or 2 of them, then you would be considered not up to date. Therefore, you would forfeit your right to be able to get part of your, probably about 50% of your government benefits, your child, legitimate. This mainly applies to low income earners, because high income earners don't get family payments. So it's really a tax on the poor. Also they would not be able to get benefits to put their children in childcare, and they would be stigmatized too, and they would be made to feel like second-class citizens every time they bring their children to the doctor. It's a real difficult burden for many parents to bear, and they shouldn't have to bear it.
Just in the instance of conscientious objectors and that, is there no one that has exemptions? Because I find
yes,
it's usually some group gets an exemption.
Well,
and I'm not going to say, I'm not going to have a hazard a guess at what they are, but yeah. I'd suggest there are some people in our community of either religious persuasion or ethnic persuasions that don't miss out on the money.
Well, the interesting thing is that if you have a doctor's exemption, then you would be exempt, and you could produce that. But doctors are terrified to give the exemption. Now we have a situation down here in New South Wales at the moment where a doctor, Dr. John Clark, he's 84 years old, and he's been issuing exemptions for people not to have, for instance, the corona vaccine. He's talked to the people. They've told him, no, I don't function well on vaccines. I've had bad reactions in the past. And he goes through the regular criteria that any doctor should go before they administer any medication, actually. And then he says, yep, on the information that you've given me, I think that, and he issues them an exemption. Now, they are currently wanting to take him down and take away his registration. He's come under huge media scrutiny, that they're lambasting him. Now, back to your original question, if we go back there, doctors understand that they can jeopardize their career in giving exemptions. There is such a powerful push to have all children vaccinated and now to have all adults vaccinated. The doctors realize that it's potentially a career destroyer. Organisations like APRA, or in New South Wales, the Healthcare Complaints Commission, will come after them, and they will lose their licence to practice, their livelihood. And there's very few doctors. It takes a brave doctor that actually will stand up and jeopardise his career to do what he feels is right.
But just in respect to the vaccination schedule and that, you basically want people to be able to make their own decisions. You're not saying that they're bad for you, carte blanche, and no one should get them. What you're saying is people should get the information, have all the information available to them.
That's right.
And then if they need additional information, they should be able to go out and seek that from their health professionals and then make an informed decision. And then, provided they can make a statement that they've looked into it, they've looked at research the thing, and they've come to an informed decision that they're not going to go ahead, that's what should be acceptable. You would think in today's democratic society that we live in.
That's right.
If I could just go to the schedule at the moment, I'll just share the schedule. Oops, wrong one. Stop that share. That's another one. All right. This is the National Immunization Program schedule.
Yep.
And we go down and we've got at birth, you've got hepatitis B. 2 months, you've got diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, which has popped its head up in the last few years a couple of times.
Which I might add that most of the children that are getting whooping cough now aren't vaccinated.
Yeah, there's also a problem too with adults who have well passed their vaccination period, sort of thing, and actually pass it on to children. It's almost like a need around young. If you're going to be around young people, you need to have a whooping cough shot to completely protect them. If not, they're not protected. But you go through 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 4 years. So that's the childhood one. And like you say, it is fairly intensive.
It's a very it's very, very intensive, and that's a lot of in a developing child's body. That's a lot of stuff to go in. Bill, you and I would have nothing like that in our childhood. We probably had a couple of jabs at school, and if we fell over and cut ourselves over, we may have got a tetanus shot. You know, hit a rusty nail or something. But we relied very heavily on our immune system. We were out in the dirt. We probably put things in our mouth that were, you know, full of bacteria, which probably only gave us a bit more resistance to those things. We actually developed very robust and healthy immune systems. But today we lock our children inside. They can't go on the street, particularly I'm talking about city and urban children. And we visually feed them and let them be gorged on television and their iPads and their phones. And we're just injecting all this stuff into them. Now, look, if a person feels that's what they want to do, our party doesn't say that you can't do that or make an objection to that. But we're very, very concerned when parents, for good reason, make a choice that they don't want to do that, all of it, or they don't want to do part of it. But it's just it's this big one size fits all.
Fits all.
Yes, and it's not right, and it hasn't been practiced like this. We've come down to this day and age, and the vaccination saturation that has existed in children for the last 10 or 15 years, particularly 10, we did have poor children health, but we went through with increased sanitisation. Like most of our houses now, we have internal toilets, we have showers, we bath regularly, we live in fairly hygienic, we keep clean kitchens, we don't live in squalor, and the life expectancy of our children is very good. I feel I come from a very healthy age. I got sick from time to time, but we were very active. We were not overfed. We were very, and I can tell you, I hardly had any vaccines, and I never did like them, of course. I can remember lining up at school, and they were a dreadful experience. And I remember one, I actually cried, and my mother said, "Oh, you don't have to have it." And I was kept away at school that day, and I dodged that bullet. But look, even through all that, I was happy. Back when my 37-year-old, I had his first one, and of course we had the reaction. You know, we just made a decision that we felt was best for our child. And the government is a poor authority to make decisions on the welfare of children. Mothers and fathers, I believe, are quite well able to look after their children. By and large, yes, we can point to some cases of abuse, but they're generally minorities. Most people love their children above everything else on earth. That's why they work their butts off. They own businesses and, you know, work long hours to give the best to their children. And they are there. They observe their children day to day. But I will say this, that, and I've said this for many times, we're very happy to support any vaccine or any medication, and there's 4 gates that they all should go through, and every medication does. One is that it's proven that it works. The second one is that it's proven to be safe. The third one is that it does have liability in the event that there is malpractice or something went wrong that the manufacturer could have avoided liability. And the fourth one is a medication should always be free of choice to choose or reject it. I think that's a reasonable ask. Your diabetic medication really goes through that gate. Your asthma medication goes through those 4 points, and pretty much every other medication, but somehow we come to vaccination and they get a free pass. All those 4 points are really not applied. So there's an inequity there. It's not right. And we've suffered it with the children for a long time, but this current one that's being foisted on us is out there on its own. It's fast tracked through. And even I believe the scant safety measures that were taken on the child, they're just been bypassed. This thing's just, she's out there, we'll take it. You're a public enemy if you even dare question. You know,
we'll get onto that topic a little bit later, but I just want to keep going with the childhood type things. My mother used to hate me coming home from my outings around the neighbourhood because although we're only about 8 or 9 kilometres from the centre of Perth, in the 1950s, we still had a gravel road. The stormwater was just a drain. At the end of the street was a paddock and a creek and wildlife. And over the other main road, Belmont Avenue, there was a dairy farm and things like that. So when you went out for the day, as a 5 and 6-year-old, you seemed to come home with some awful things, and sometimes awful things attached to your body, like leeches, which my mum sort of really enjoyed getting off me, but no, Dad didn't mind using his cigarette to get it off. But you really did grub up, and the thing is, apparently, when I was a younger child, I was even worse. I actually ate the dirt. Mud pies was.
Well, you were getting good. You were getting that was no problem. A lot of animals eat dirt for their
And to my way of thinking, maybe that's something that the CSIRO should be involved in. Is come up with a dirt pill that could give kids the same healthy immune system that we gained the natural thing. So
Yes.
come up with a dirt pill or something that's got all those little bacteria that test out your body functions and that. And I mean, I think I've even heard things like hookworms and that. All those, there's always been a push to get rid of worms out of your system and that. But there are some benefits from some of these organisms and that. But maybe those things need to be a bit more explored as well.
Yes, the benefit of children running, playing, and coming into conflict with nature and the dirty side of it is undervalued. As I've said, we try to shield our children from it. And I've always had. I grew up in the town, but my children have all grown up in the country, and so in the morning they were off, and they would come back with animals and this and that, and they'd eat things, of course, along the way, probably very unhygienic. They get cuts and abrasions. They were extremely healthy and experienced good health.
Well, that's the general thing with children's health now. It seems to be they seem to be fairly susceptible to a lot of things, and asthma would have to be one of the biggest problems now with young people.
Yeah,
I don't really hear much of asthma being a problem in third world countries. It seems to be Australia is really, really bad. And then, of course, in other Western countries, it's fairly prevalent. But I don't know of it being a problem in Peru or South Africa or Somalia or those sort of places. So that's one of the problems, I think, probably with our over emphasis on hygiene. I mean, we don't want to be dirty people, but I mean, we do get to the stage where our whole households is like, let's clean the bathroom, and then the other half cleans the bathroom, and then you walk in it, and then you're overpowered by bleach and everything. So we do give ourselves a pretty big hounding in the sort of sanitising bleachers and cleaners. So maybe if we're going to do that, we probably need to do the other part, get out in nature occasionally and enjoy the other side of getting a few germs to build up resistance.
Yes, well, that's true. That's one part of it. Unfortunately, I feel that our children today, we've really haven't not doing them a service and building stronger Australians. They're overstimulated, they're overfed, they're underworked, they're under-exercised, and we keeping them locked up. We got to have the hat on. The sun is a terror to them. Honestly, I don't think I had a hat in my life. We ran around, and of course we all had short hair that was promptly cut off if it got too long. And I think it was a great. Our parents used to tell us, "Oh, you look healthy. You're nice and brown." That would be considered to be irresponsible now. We must cover them all up.
But it's also, especially now with children, that the exercise component is almost gone.
Yes.
As for them to actually want to do it themselves, it's almost there has to be it has to be incentivized, like a team sport. You're going somewhere or something they particularly like, but maybe they haven't got a backyard to go out and play in, but there's not much ball throwing or those sort of activities.
No, there's not. No.
But the other problem is it's also been taken out of school a fair bit. I mean, I remember as a child going to school, going early. We got the earliest you could go into the school ground was about 8 o'clock in the morning for a 9 o'clock start. But when you went there, you used to have a curator, and this is just at a normal public school, but they used to put out, in summer times, they put out the cricket bats and wickets, and I think there was always netballs, basketballs, and then, of course, in the winter, there was footballs put out. And so there was always, before school, there was a good percentage of kids turned up, and you could always get a game of British Bulldog or all sorts of other games, competitive games, or just put up the we put the wickets in and a bit of cricket, taking turns bowling and that. So that was a strong emphasis. And then even we had this, of course, the school colours and that, and it was divided up. And every Friday afternoon was a competition between the different colours in various sports, girls and boys. And then there was also general exercise during the week for different classes. And one of the things I used to hate, that was always on, was bloody cross country, you know. But because sometimes they did it in absolute appalling weather, which I wasn't really that keen on. But no, we all sort of live through it, and we're all a bit more resilient. But
yes, right.
I think now we've got children. I mean, gee whiz, they're such sooks,
Yes.
and they've got no resilience whatsoever. It's a real worry.
On this point too, we lived in the country. We brought up our children. My son, I told you, had the bad reaction. He got over that after a couple of years, but we worked them hard on the farm. They always had a lot of work to do, and there was no choice in their meals. That was the meal that was served. They ate it and they loved it. We tried not to overfeed them, and fast tracking a few years later, he joined the army when he was at Kapuka in 2007 at boot camp. Of course, I had no contact with him while there, and I said to him later on, "How did it go?" He says, "Oh, it was okay." I says, "Was it hard?" He says, "A little bit." No, it wasn't too bad. And he said, "Dad, there were boys crying here. They were crying for their mother, and they had to go." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "It was pretty." He couldn't believe it because he'd been brought up tough, and so I said, "You didn't find it hard?" No. He said, "It was all, you know, it was fine, Dad. It was fine, no problem." And of course, he went on and he served in Afghanistan in active duty, and he's always had good jobs. And I always feel that today that, you know, we've had this great reliance on medication to solve all our problems, but the problems are at our fingertips. We just need to let children themselves have inquisitive minds. They become, through work, playing, out there, interacting with each other, even out on the streets, which doesn't seem to happen. I find it a bit alarming now that streets are deserted of children. When I was young, streets were full of children outside school hours, where we were all interacting and playing.
Getting up to mischief?
Yeah. Sometimes, and the mischief was like swiping fruit off someone's, Mrs. Jones's fruit tree, or, you know, investigating, you know, pinching an egg out of someone's chook, and then we would actually go and we would cook them, light a fire, you know, all those unhygienic things.
in regards to those sort of things, like, I was fairly active. I actually joined the Defence Force, and I had that experience. Although our suburb was reasonably close to Perth, it still had a bit of an urban rural touch. And we did go camping and those sort of things. It was the same situation for me. I joined the Air Force at 15 as apprenticeship, and there was a wide diversity of, even back then, people who sort of couldn't handle the situation, and it was, in a lot of cases, as you say, it was usually those inner city people that were a bit stumped with the situation.
Yes.
In regards to things today like ADHA or whatever it is, HD, I think all the children of our era had that. But the thing is, by the time they walked to school, ran around at school, come home, did some chores, went out and played with their mates, and had tea. By that time, they were so tired that they sort of it's bedtime, and they just went to bed. And of course, there was no screen. So, has modern living also become an issue? And how do you suggest we sort of, you know, focus on this? There need to be parents to be more vigilant and get children out out there doing things rather than depending on medication and counselling.
Yes, there's a lot of counselling out there, looking at the sky, climbing a tree, for both. My daughter used to like to tag along and try and climb the trees with my son too. But ADHD, autism, I take your point about the children today. There's not enough burning up of all that energy that young people actually have. And so it can be expressed in bad behavior. But I do think there is a problem as well. And of course, this leads me to another one. There's been a lot of work which has been, by mainstream media, so-called debunked, that there's a link between vaccination and autism. But it is at epidemic levels. In 1970, it was in city areas, it was 1 in 10,000. In country areas, 1 in 15,000 children were autistic. Current figures are now it's less than 1 in 50. So there, even if the figures are slightly fudged, that's a huge disparity from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 50. And you find that this is rampant, not in third world countries, but and it's proportionate to the vaccination levels. And you have a look, if you look at the United States of America, that have the Amish community living right in their midst, who don't participate in the vaccination program, they also have pretty much zero autism. And they do have problems. I've spent time in Amish communities, and they may have a slight amount of incest or a little marrying too close, but because they don't have a big pool to pick on in some of the small, tighter communities, and they'll end up marrying cousins and so forth. But I think this really needs to be looked at. So, not undervaluing in any way the positive results from children breaking from this life. It really rests with the parents, and everything's against a parent today to be able to try and get their children back to nature, particularly in a city environment. There's danger in the street, there's danger in the classroom. The old man that likes to smile at the child, he's a pedophile suspect. I really hate how it's come to that. I can remember as a child, we had great respect for older people. If an older person said hello to us in the street, we'd say, "Oh, hello," and we'd say back. We wouldn't run off, and we would respect him for what he was, and we were taught that. But now they're drilled that, I feel that they're drilled that older people and other, there's even a further disconnect between the ages, which is not healthy. It's not healthy for young people to grow up like that. Sounds all rather doom and gloom, doesn't it, about our society? And I don't want to sound like that. There are a lot of people that see through this and are really taking steps to give their children a different life.
If I could just move on to the immunisation schedule for the older people, yes. Older children.
Yeah.
We move up now to basically the cervical cancer protection, yes, and meningococcal and that. Has there been any problems with that, or
the Gardasil is a real problem. Yeah. The Gardasil has a huge amount, and there's organisations that have looked thoroughly into this. The Children's Health Defence Fund, led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in America, they have done huge exposés on the trouble, and with Gardasil, they have thousands and thousands of young people that have been damaged, some of them irreparably, from these vaccines. There is a problem. They are not foolproof. The results are questionable. it's yeah, it's a real problem. I haven't got time to, I'm not going to go in. I don't even have my facts and figures here, but there are, in Australia, there's the Australian Vaccination Risk Network. They do a lot of work on this. They have got families, they've got interviews. You can go onto their sites and see the interviews with people and parents that have had tragic results from these vaccinations. If, for instance, we were, and this has happened, you have a car, you manufacture a car, and you have an airbag that fails once or twice, that's enough to see that airbag company possibly ruined and that airbag withdrawn from every car that it's in. And we apply that to safety products, and that's good. That's fair. That makes us, that makes the manufacturers on their toes and to give us a good product. But when it comes to the vaccines, because there is no liability for vaccines, because they cannot be sued, because the government ruled in 1986 under Ronald Reagan that he gave all vaccines have a free pass on vaccines, because they were going to go broke, because they were causing so much problem. And we are calling that this be completely reviewed. We feel that all products, particularly a product that is injected into our body and into the body of our children, needs to have liability, not so that we can get money, because this is what keeps the bees honest. This is what makes them be thorough in their research, because if they know they'll be sued, they will think, no, we can't let that go out, that will ruin us. But if they don't have that in there, then of course that incentive is not there. And I might say, to carry on from this liability business, even without the liability, the pharmaceuticals companies have been sued many times for malpractice, billions and billions of dollars, by virtue of the huge amount of fines that they have been fined for malpractice, for lying, for being dishonest and putting faulty products out there. They are the most dishonest companies in the world. So their currency of trust is low. It's certainly low in my book. It's very low in many families' book. But of course, the media ignores that. We don't see mainstream media ever dealing with this one. And that's an irresponsible act by media. So parties like Informed Medical Options Party, all we're here is to represent the views of people that are unrepresented. And of course, we do have a larger platform as well, but I won't go into that now.
In regards to getting proper evidence on that,
yes.
Is there reasonable evidence to suggest that the vaccines, to some degree, have reduced the incidence, or is that not sustainable?
Okay. No, we don't believe it's sustainable. For instance, if you take polio, which is the one that most they will front up, it's very convenient to front up the polio vaccine, which is long gone, but now we statistically, polio was virtually eradicated through hygiene and the eradication of, because polio came out of harsh chemicals that we used in a broad spectrum way. If you look at the history of polio came out of nowhere at around the turn of the century, back in the 1800s to the 1900s. And then with the rise of chemicals where they were used wholesale without restrictions that we have on them today, and then as people realised the detrimental effects of chemicals, that waned and polio waned. Now, there's a lot of research being done on the where did polio come, why did polio materialise, and then it disappeared pretty much before the vaccine was introduced. And the vaccine, of course, was hailed as the saviour of polio. That's under a lot of dispute by a lot of very reputable and scientists, and statistically. There's books written about, there's a book written that graphs this very well by Kathy Scarborough. She's a South Australian researcher, and she's put all these graphs out in her book that show, just using the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, case and how it has gone. And I fear this is going to happen even in COVID, because now we've hit summer. Last year we hit summer, and what happened? The cases disappeared of COVID. They virtually went down to nothing. And then, of course, they rose again in winter when we have our flu season. This year they're going to disappear again. And I fear, they're going to credit its disappearance with the vaccine, even though it disappeared last year before the vaccine. And the masks and the vaccines will be hailed as heroes, particularly from the likes of maniacs like Dan Andrews, and there'll be nothing that we can say. And as time goes on, I fear we'll look back and say, well, we dodged a bullet with a wonderful vaccine, when the reality is, I don't know what they're going to say. Of course, it'll come up again next winter. It'll be a new strain. It might be the Delta strain now. It might be the Sierra strain.
Just going on to preventative medicines.
Yes.
Some things like folate, right?
Yeah.
Folate is encouraged for women thinking about getting pregnant. The suggestion is that it increases the possibility of spina bifida, I think was the issue. And because people don't know when they're actually going to get pregnant, and a lot of people get pregnant who shouldn't even think of having a kid, and not prepared for it at all. Folate has been put into bread, I think. Well, I have seen it. Well, it is on Tip Top bread that there's folate in it anyway.
Yes.
Do you see a problem with those sort of things, or is there a reasonable benefit? Because I'm not sure about the structure of folate, but it's a reasonably common product, or is it over an engineered product?
Well, yes, it's an interesting thing. The bread, I mean, we're talking about folate, not bread. They put it, yes, it's put into bread, but the bread that's often so utterly devitalized and quick raised, it's all about manufacturing a bread very quickly, with heavily hybridized wheats that are largely indigestible. And of course, with the rise of the hybridized wheat, we've got all sorts of digestive problems, and of course we've got obesity problems, and we've got diabetic problems, and that's a whole different a story in itself. So I don't know everything about the folate, but just adding the folate to a very poor product, I think that if we could eat good breads, which I'm very particular about my bread that I buy. I don't eat a lot of bread. Getting a good sourdough bread, and they're quite prolific these days, because they break down the grain a lot better, and so it's much more easily digested, because you can get spelt, you can get emigraines, and there's a whole lot of other things. I don't know if that goes to ways to answering your question.
All right.
We add all these little things. We add niacin, we add iron, we add this and that, but really, I feel it's all just, what do they add? And is it all just commercial?
Well, just in the natural health side, if a woman went to a natural practitioner and said she was thinking about getting pregnant and having children, would there be anything would be suggested to them that they might increase their intake of to sort of go through that stage?
Well, as a natural therapist, we'd be encouraging them to eat a very good wholesome diet, lots of vegetables, fruit, having things in their natural state, good cooked foods. The body's able to convert good food into everything it needs. I think
folate does naturally occur in some vegetables.
That's correct. And your B12s and your acidophilus and bifidus and all these good bacteria that are often destroyed by, well, we live in an age that I feel that we're quite saturated in antibiotics, which have had an unbalancing effect in the gut. Not that antibiotics don't have a place, but I feel that and what I'm saying here is not revolutionary. This is being touted by even from the medical profession. The overuse of antibiotics is a very real and present threat to the health. You know, we're using it for such minor complaints that people will get over quite simply, and then they've got immunity to them, and they won't work when they really is something that they could need an antibiotic.
Yeah, I think that is a problem, especially in the cough and cold season. If you have a little bit of persistent cough and maybe a bit of phlegm, well, here's a 7-day course of antibiotics, and that seems to be the general treatment. And
well, you know what
like
they
I say,
say,
going to a doctor, the difference between with a cold or a flu is going to a doctor. It takes 2 weeks. Okay, to get over. If you don't see a doctor, it takes 14 days.
Yeah, that's it. That's right.
That's the general.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any difference, sort of thing.
No.
So, but I suppose it's always a perception how the person feels in regards to, well, I've got help, I've done the right thing, I've seen the doctor, so you know, I've done all I can, so I feel better in myself, and just wear the rest of it. But by not going to the doctor, you probably think you haven't done enough to look after yourself. And usually, if you have got a cough and cold or flu, and you don't do something about it, the other half gives you grief, don't they? In regards to you've got a man flu, you wuss.
Yes,
it does seem to be a problem. We don't seem. The other half always seems to think we're pretty poor on sort of handling these sort of illnesses.
Yes,
I don't know about in your household.
Well, my wife's is Barbara O'Neill, and she travels the world lecturing on health. She's currently in North Carolina at the moment, and she's been through Europe all this the last month. She's been into South America twice. And I might add, while I'm just talking about this, she tells me that everywhere she goes, whether it's in Germany, Holland, Italy, any of the states in America, people tell her, what is happening in Australia? What's happening? Is it true? Is it true that they're making you have vaccinating children and you've got to have a pass to get in, and they're closing everything down? She says, I believe so, according to my husband. They can't believe it. They said, is it gone communist? Because we would think that this might be happening over there, but it's not. She said she's flying everywhere. When she leaves a country, when she goes out of America and comes back in, they require her to have a COVID test within no later than 72 hours. And if it's negative, come in and that's it. She had to have it into Germany and Italy. She said she didn't have to have one in Belgium, definitely not Mexico, didn't have to have it in Holland. She says Holland's no mask. Some of the states in America have 0 masks. You never see one. Idaho was one, down in Florida. She said, but if you go to New York, they're a little bit more like Australia. They've a lot of fear up there. But anyway, that's a slight diversion there. But we're just educating people, and my wife's a great one for helping mothers, expectant mothers. And it's always about getting the good diet, doing some squatting in your garden, just getting the fresh air, keep the movement up, girls. And, you know, she gives them exercises. And look, they have wonderful births when you do it. When we have these very sedentary, and now, of course, they'll whip you in for a cesarean at the drop of a hat. Any slight looks like a bit of discomfort or going to be, there's even a potential problem, out it comes.
Yeah. Well, that would be a lot to do with the doctor's insurance premiums, I think.
Well, I suppose so. They probably make so many thousand for a birth and put another 0 on the end for a cesarean. I don't want to sound too cynical. I have a very good friend who's a doctor. He just lives near me. He's my neighbour, and he's retired, and he said they've just offered him to come back as a doctor, and give him his registration back temporarily for vaccinations. He said, well, I can't do that because I don't believe in it. And I said to him, you don't believe in it, Robert? And he said, no, not at all. He said, I feel this one is a real mistake. He said, I had trouble with the children and I never ever did my own children. He said, but this one, it's bypassed every normal precaution that you would have as a medical practitioner.
Just before we get on to COVID, because obviously
sure.
we've got to touch on that, I'd just like to go and just put up a screen share of some of the major political parties' constitution, because you wouldn't think it would be necessary to form your party if you believe if you already had a party that believed in the Australian Constitution, our rights and our freedoms, and had that embedded in their own constitution.
Well, I'm sure you'll probably find it is embedded in their own constitution. I've read through their constitutions. They don't even live
so I'll just chuck up a couple.
Yeah.
Now, I'll go up to the Liberal Party first. Dedicated to political liberty and freedom and dignity of man. Freedom of speech, religion, association, freedom of citizens to choose their own way of living and of life subject to the rights of others, and protecting people against exploitation. Now, you think within that, that basically says between the Australian Constitution and what you've got there, you would have a reasonable amount of leeway to make your own decisions.
Yes.
And not think, Labor Party, not so much, but they do have recognition and protection of fundamental political and civil rights, including freedom of expression, press, assembly, association, conscientious religion, right to privacy, protection of the individual from oppression from the state, right for all people to liberty, equality, democracy, and social justice. I mean, so it's not quite as open as that, but it's still within the realms that you think you could make decisions like you're talking about within their structure. The National Party, basically, it's all about themselves. They're really not really into our constitution or looking after it. All they got is the maintenance of democracy, liberty, and incentive for individual enterprises and pursuit of excellence. There's not a lot there, and if you go to the Greens, it actually gets a lot worse. So. But you would think within our Australian Constitution and what the Liberal Party's constitution is, you would have a pretty, you with your position, should have a fairly good chance of them representing your views and looking after your freedom of choice. But it doesn't seem to happen. So
yes, unfortunately, you're correct, and I like you have read through their constitutions, and I read through them, whoops, where did I go?
No, you're still here.
Oh, I read through them, years ago when we were doing our constitution. The words are there. There's no lack of good words, but there's a lack of goodwill.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And they are actually operating in violation of their constitutions, and they're operating, I believe, in violation of the Australian Constitution. Section 5123A of the Constitution states, with regard to medical funding, that there is to be no civil conscription. No civil conscription. And it's right there talking about the area of pharmaceutical, medical. In other words, there's no compulsion, but we're completely in violation of that now, and that's a real indictment on our society. I don't like living in a country that's like this. Now, I just spoke with one of our candidates. She's just spent a day in jail. She's from Sydney. And I asked her, why did they arrest you? She said, they arrested me because they felt I was organising a march. Now, she wasn't organising it. She told them she wasn't organising it, nor did she even go to it. but she was promoting people to go there online. So she's a candidate for a registered political party in Australia, promoting a different political view than the mainstream political party, and she was arrested. So therefore, she is a political prisoner. Now, let me ask you this, Bill. What countries in the world have political prisoners? Well, Nazi Germany, China, yes, the USSR, Australia has now this young lady who was a single mother, had 2 children, was taken from her home, had to leave her children. She was in a high state of distress. After being in jail for a while, she asked for a shower. She said she looked up, and while she's in there's a policeman looking at her. She said it was the most degrading, humiliating experience. She said the air conditioning was so cold, she had to there was no not even a blanket to sleep with in the night. How is this how we treat people, someone who is a candidate for a registered political party? They make political prisoners. We're in bad shape, Bill. We're not in the right direction.
Well, I think a lot of people would be surprised how, like, the thing with the comparisons with Nazi Germany comes up with a lot of things in general other conversations, and people generally will say, well, it could never happen here.
Yes.
Well, I'm afraid from what I've seen, there's only too many people willing to be the instigators and the muscle for politicians.
Yes.
Now, I got a lot of respect for police in general, but I'd sort of been taken aback by some of the enthusiasm that they've shown in this instance to tackle ordinary citizens who probably have never done a thing wrong with their life.
Yes.
And take them on with such force and without a care. Whereas come to another group of people, last year, they took a knee to them. They took a knee to these thugs. So it's very concerning that suddenly we have this politicalisation of police forces. And then the other thing is we've also got a media. The media use, if you go back to your history and you did your French Revolution and all that sort of thing, and then when the press became, it was called the Fourth Estate. That's where it first got its name, and it's basically its role was to keep the people informed with the truth and a objectivity of what was going on around them. But now the media has become a cheer squad for certain sections of the political sphere. And that's very concerning. They never ask any tough questions. They never seek to give any additional information. And I found something really, really strange today. Because Janet Young was in a story in the Courier Mail and basically says, well, once we open the borders, everyone will be infected by COVID. There's no escaping it. So get vaccinated. Now, I've always sort of had a lot of research when this thing first started, and there's two real instances: the Diamond Princess out of Yokohama and the USS Roosevelt. 2 instances where there was a high load, confined spaces. Now, in both of those instances, less than I think it was about 81% did not even contract the virus. In both cases, the stats was 3,700 people aboard the Diamond Princess, 4,200 on the USS Roosevelt. The number of infections was 712 against 840. That's within 5 decimal points of a percent of each other, as in the number of people who actually caught the disease. And of course, you had of the 712 who got it on the Diamond Princess, there was 13 deaths. And then on the Roosevelt was 1 death and four hospitalizations. But the difference, of course, was the age group of the people and the health of the people on the Roosevelt was much more constrained than on the Diamond Princess. So we had that information fairly early in the piece, And the other thing, when COVID first happened in Italy, in the first month, we got a lot of information in regards to comorbidity, and we're actually, parts of the media, you're actually getting pie graphs every week in regards to the number of people who passed away, and then all the different comorbidities they had. But then by April, that had stopped, and there'd been this complete politicalisation and weaponisation of the disease. And I think that's what's happened right around the world, and unfortunately it's come into Australia, and it is very concerning. And I think one of the other problems that I've always had was that no one's ever got up there and from the first instance say, well, this is COVID and this is what happened. Now, whereas most people probably don't even know how you progress through influenza from getting chest infection, going through to get septicemia, and then die of sepsis. That's the general phase it takes if they can't actually stop it in those first 7 days, because it usually takes 7 days to manifest itself from being a hospital case to possible death. Unfortunately, COVID seems to be accelerate that situation, goes from being very sick in hospital, requiring hospital care, to death in 48 hours. So you had less time to interfere. But no one's actually got up and explained to the population the difference between the two or the similarities. And I think that's a big shortcoming in regards to medical people giving us all the information. Now, do you think we aren't getting much information, or haven't got a lot of information on this that we should have?
No, we do not get information. We get political rhetoric and fear. We're basically told this is what we have to do because trust us, we're the people that know. They use selective figures. You know, I've looked at figures, and even in the countries with epidemics, their annual death rate in 2020 is not out of average. And these are countries that were supposedly in the Northern Hemisphere, like England, Italy. They're still in if you take the 20-year average range, they're still right there. And of course, you've got whistleblowers like people in the undertaker, the funeral business, and saying there is our deaths are average. I mean, I'm sure that if there was one industry they looked at COVID and thought, oh, bingo, we're going to make a killing, this is payday. And they sat around with their empty hearses or just doing no more than usual. And they're blowing the whistle on it, and it gets not covered or touched with the media. So I think we are not getting the information. There is no way. And the information that's coming from scientists and very reputable people who are willing to jeopardize their entire careers to come out and say, listen, this is not correct. People like Michael Yielden, former vice president of Pfizer, who's come out and blown the whistle on the whole thing. The doctors, professors from inside the system, knowing that full well, they're coming out and saying, the figures don't lie, we're being sold a pup. And of course, how are they met? They're met by ridicule. They don't get a voice on mainstream media. And then the figures that we're told are, and I think it's laughable, they'll say, so many cases of ravage, and they use all these extreme words, and so many deaths, and people are just cringing in their homes. A lot of vulnerable people, no, poor old people. They're just thinking, oh dear, this is a terrible. But if you give a little bit of thought, you think, well, that's actually what they had 6 people die, or we've had 1,000 in the year. In the proportion of the people that die in our country, this is a very small amount. This is even if they were to have all died of COVID. But as you correctly pointed out a while ago, the comorbidities of these people, and I don't think that there's any need for the Premier to get on the television and offer a public apology, or the Health Minister, or condolences to the family of the 94-year-old that died in palliative care from COVID. You're 94 years old in palliative care, you're dying.
But one of the other things that I sort of amazed at too is every time a young person caught COVID, a child, it made the headline, and you never heard anything else after that because it wasn't a problem. Yes, they got COVID,
better.
They got better, so it was a non-story, but they jumped on it all the time and amplified it. But the media has already had so much practice from climate change, like the doomsday scenario. They put through that. It's the headlines, and that's all they need. And you only need to get the headline out there once with the bad news. They never have to justify it either. And if the story changes, well, you don't even have to report it. So they've already pretty well versed in this, and I think that's the problem. The media has forgot its job as the fourth estate, and that's really concerning.
Well, Bill, I feel that, if you look at most totalitarian regimes, the governments very firmly controlled the media and they fed the people. The government fed the media, which fed the people. But in this day and age, we've got the media. It generates the story, it generates the narrative and the fear, and the politicians are ruled by that because they're terrified of bad press. They're terrified that there'll be some expose on them, and that they're not willing to be brave and step out and do anything. So it's the media that's actually controlling, and the puppets. The politicians are the puppets, I feel.
And I think that's true in a degree, because the politicians are so bloody lazy to do any real research themselves.
Yes.
And then not only that, then they're not even confident enough, even if they had the basic facts and research from someone eminent and then had it all in front of them, they'd still be frightened to voice that opinion. Or maybe other than a few people, maybe like Craig Kelly or someone like that.
Or George Christian.
Overall, they follow the party line, and even the opposition in the states, where if it's a Labor government and a Liberal opposition, the opposition is no opposition. It doesn't give any counter view.
No counter view. It's a race to the bottom.
Follow the lead.
It's a race to the bottom. There's no logical response. And they're in a dilemma because, you've in Queensland, you've got this the poor old mad woman up there in charge, and the opposition is Liberal National LNP. But if they start to disagree with her, then they're also disagreeing with their federal counterparts in Canberra. So they're all caught on a dilemma, and so they're all just in this one. On this issue, it's become one incestuous soup where they all are saying the same rubbish, and they're not listening to any alternate view. There's no bravery here at all, just cowardness.
But just in general, with the general population, I mean, we have so many tools at our disposal, and especially for those people who are locked down for bloody months on end, you think they could get on the internet and do a bit of research themselves and come up with a counter view. But you find that we are probably our own worst enemies in the fact that we just go along with it. I'll call it bullshit. This bullshit that we're the Anzac spirit and all this, it's all instilled in us. Well, I reckon come next Anzac Day, anyone who says that garbage wants to kick in the butt, because the Australian public demeanour is one of subservience now. Is like, I don't want to be in danger. I thank someone that's protecting me. We have become actually super dependent on government looking after us. They're looking after our best interests. When has a government ever looked after our best interests? When has a government ever put our policy out there that's been a benefit other than money to buy votes? It does nothing other than constrain our lives, and it substitutes remittances of money as the thing to buy the votes, and you just forget about your loss of freedom here and there, sort of thing.
Yes.
You can't go to a national park and use a national park. You can't do this. You can't do that. But we seem to have been so easily bored off. And like I say, we're supposed to be reasonably well educated and be able to think process, but we don't seem to be doing that.
No, we don't. No, it is quite sad. And I feel that this is our heavy reliance on, we are an affluent society, generally. We all have comfortable homes. We have the older people are mainly watching television. Younger people are on their screens, and generally what you watch is what you've looked at, and they work out, they'll keep feeding you the same narrative through your phone and through your screens. We've become very reliant on a medical system that's utterly corrupt, and we feel that, and we've lost our just general bravery as a nation. We're not a larrikin nation. We're not. She'll be right. I mean, Paul Hogan made fun of Leo Wanker, who was the guy that was all the officious little guy that ran around and followed all the rules. He made a character, and we all Australians laughed at him. We thought, what a stupid. Well, that Leo Wanker is now multiplied and is in every level of government, and we're sort of following rules. And you couldn't get. I feel that you could put Dan Andrews' face on that guy, and there'd be a perfect fit. See, we were a nation that could have a laugh at ourselves too, all our idiosyncrasies. And honestly, you could go to the pub or anywhere, you could have a disagreement with your friends there, and there might be a few raised voices. And honestly, there could even be a punch-up, but it'd be all over. We've become this sanitized nation. Not only do we sanitize our hands and we sanitize our houses, but our brains are being desensitized and sanitized, that we're not critical thinkers, and that there's not any sort of just robust thought processes happening, because the information, as you said, is there. There's a multitude of alternate view for all to see on the internet. I know people that just will not look at it, and I've said, oh no, I'm not looking at it. Oh, yeah, so we find our little comfort zones here. And you mentioned about Anzac Day. I agree wholeheartedly. I don't know how people are going to celebrate Anzac Day this coming year when they are actually supporting government policy and have participated in government policy that opposes the spirit of the Anzacs. I don't even know how people are going to say and assemble on Sorry Day for the Aborigines when they're supporting a government and a process that's going into Aboriginal communities, taking away children, happening in my area here, and mass vaccinating people and basically overriding their freedom of choice, basically saying, listen, you black fellas don't know what you're talking about. We white fellas will just do what we like, and they're just a soft target. So all the things that we hold dear and beat our breast about as, we're such a, wonderful nation. We're tolerant. We're not tolerant at all. We're an intolerant nation. We are a discriminatory nation. We're a segregated nation. Everything that we pat ourselves on the back of overcoming, we do. And the good percentage of the people support it. And it's like the Germans that lived through Hitlerism. They couldn't see it when they lived in it, when it didn't affect them, even though it affected their neighbor, when they still had some prosperity and they still had freedom to go to the theater, to the cafes, ride on the bus, because they had the correct paper that if they were questioned, they could pull it out and they were fine. They had scant regard for the neighbor who may have been a Jewish or a Jehovah's Witness or a gypsy or some other subversive element. They were taken off and never seen again. So we have, I'm not exaggerating, I really feel we have that same spirit. The actual acts mightn't be as extreme as that, but the principles and the philosophy that underpinned all that is actually happening to us, and it could grow as bad as that. And if we value freedom and if we value history, we should we need to open our eyes, and we should fight. And we should fight for the people that are losing their rights, even if we have our own. And I know many people that have been vaxxed and double vaxxed and still on our side, and they say, listen, I didn't really want to do this, but I had to keep my job, and I'm very upset, and I'm going to fight that this never happens again. And some of them have done it. I have talked to a lady the other day, and she said, I'm happy I was double vaxxed, but I'm still very angry that the government is making people do this, because my daughter doesn't want to, and she's so upset. So I'm going to fight with you guys because I value the rights of my daughter. See, so there's people fighting in this in all different perspectives, because the loss of choice over our own bodies, the last bastion of freedom that a human being has is the right over their body. Like, there's nothing more invasive. And when something is inserted into your body against your will, it's called rape. So we're having this medical rape of our citizens. And while we might say, oh, me too, I was violated, or these other, we're seeing the medical rape of old people. We're seeing the medical rape of middle-aged business people, service people, and people at every spectrum in Australia. It's not right, it's not fair, and it's absolutely not Australian. And so that motivates me, Bill. That motivates me. I don't like what we've become, and that's why we have to work to do this. And I'm not alone. I work with the Great Australia Party through our organisation called CADCO, the Australian Federation Party. We all agree that there is a great stink in the land, and we're working together in a cooperative way to try and make a difference, and to try and turn back and bring proper law. And we actually have the laws, just like you showed that the Liberal Party had good laws in their constitution, they have a wonderful statements in there, but they don't live by it. We have good laws in Australia. We just need to start living by the laws we have in Australia.
I think the other thing that concerns me in regards is the willingness of people and business people for either their own self-interest or fear,
yes,
who want to impose this on other people. And that to me is a problem. I think if you're vaccinated and that was your choice, and that should be the end of it. And we shouldn't be discriminating. But between people not obeying all the lockdown laws, a number of people who were only too eager to dob other people in scares the hell out of me.
Yes.
And then reading the comments on a lot of the news articles and that, people calling for people to be put in jail and be thrown away and things like that. I know. That's appalling to me in regards to, are you so afraid of something that is arguably for a certain group demographic is more serious than the flu? For the bulk of the people, it's no more a problem than the flu. But the level of fear that people have got into, where they're actually calling for people basically, should get 12 months jail, or throw them away, lock the key, give them millions of dollars fined, and that. It's quite scary.
Well, when Hitler spun the lie that the Jews were dirty, unclean, thieves, and all the other thing, the people could willingly say, yes, they probably do deserve to be taken away out of our society. They're not fit to be in our society. People are subject. They do look to leaders. Now, if you look in the United States, you have, I just bring it to your attention, you have Florida down the bottom of the East Coast, and you have New York up the top. That's right. His rhetoric and his leadership says we will not have vaccine passports. You can get vaccinated if you want to, but we're not going to have mask mandates. We're free. It's not a big problem. So the people follow that lead, and they're happy. They go around with no mask. They're not obsessed with turning in their neighbours and being dobbed. They're very happy, and people are flocking. You go to New York, they have the opposite rhetoric. Fear, we must do that. And the people seem to be comfortable to live in the fear. So there's a great responsibility on leaders. So you've got two different leaders, two different narratives, the same English-speaking American citizens, and there's two completely different reactions. People follow the leaders. And I was staggered that in Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk got such a strong vote. And I realised, I feel like she's done such a terrible job in Queensland. From someone outside of Queensland, I don't think she's done a good job economically. I think she's generally mismanaged the state, but she slid through on I'm keeping Queensland safe. That's right, which is a Furby. It's not true. She hasn't kept Queensland safe. She's kept Queensland poor. She's kept it in fear, and she's decimated hundreds of thousands of people's lives and small businesses. I visited Cairns in the last, when Queensland was open, Bill, and I was astounded at the amount of buildings, shops that were vacant. Now, I've been to Cairns. I go there from time to a few years ago, and it was vibrant. It was full of overseas tourists. The souvenir shops were all open and bustling with people. When I was up there, I was just surprised. It was just pretty much Australians and I was there outside of holiday time, so it was fairly deserted.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, look at this. They've just wrecked this whole town, this whole economy. How many destroyed that shop there? I looked at an empty store. There's a destroyed life behind it. There's a lot of heartache, and someone's probably still in debt for all the expenses they incurred to try and start it. No, Anastasia Palaszczuk it's a dog's breakfast she's made up there in Queensland, and she didn't deserve to be voted back in. A lot of people voted her in, and I'm really sorry for the poor people that have to live there and be subject to these bad decisions. The Gold Coast, of course, is to be suffering. Sunshine Coast to be suffering. There's a suffering right up and down the land. Queensland's the place you go to find sunshine, and have your holidays. She's locked the border. She's even locked us out. I have my son, who I mentioned was in the middle. She lives in Airlie Beach. My daughter lives in Brisbane. I can't visit my children. Why? Just for some irrational phobia that she has, and of course it feeds to the worst fear that through the people. So I really feel sorry for Queensland. I do feel a little bit of hope with Dominic Perrottet down here in New South Wales. I'm certainly not ready to write him off. He seems to be saying the right things and making better decisions. I think you're stuck with that woman up there for a little while longer, unfortunately.
Yeah, 2024 anyway is the next chance we get. Anyway, we've gone well and truly over the hour. I'd like to thank you very much for your time.
That's all right, Bill.
And we'll have a bit of a chat after. Don't go away. I'll just wrap up the show and introduce next week's show and come back to you. If you enjoyed the show tonight, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page or to our YouTube channel. Next week, I'll have on Mark Banaszak on the shooters, fishers, and farmers. He's currently the chairman of the inquiry into the sustainability of the timber industry in New South Wales. So that will be an interesting conversation in regards to where we're going in regards to one of our important primary industries. So join us again next week. Thank you.